Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment is kind of a collaboration of some concerns. It basically addresses concerns raised involving schools, secured areas of airports, hospitals, nursing home facilities, and mental hospitals, and also state hospitals. And I've worked, I believe it's acceptable to the author. I want to say that I appreciate Chairman Kane working with us on this. Also, Chair Murr, Representative Martinez Fisher, Representative Talarico. I move adoption.
Ms. Flores, for what purpose?
A question of the author of the bill after the amendment.
Okay. The chair recognizes Mr. Martinez Fisher.
Will he yield for a question?
Mr. Spiller, will you yield for a question?
Yes, I will.
He yields
Yes,
for
I
a
will.
question.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify what the amendment does exactly. So you're saying that you're going to allow signs in the places that you just listed. What were those places again?
Yes, that's correct. They would be allowed to be in the list that I just provided. Schools, that those would remain, the law remain the same with regard to schools, secured areas of airports, hospitals, nursing home facilities, mental hospitals, and state hospitals.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
The chair recognizes Mr. Martinez Fisher in favor of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I want to thank Representative Spiller for pulling us all together. We all had our own concerns about this bill. I'll tell you, for me, the portion of this amendment dealt with airports. About 2 years ago today, when we were in session, you probably all remember we had an active shooter at our airport, actually opened fire on police officers at our airport. And so I just don't want to do anything with signs or notices or give anybody any defense for anything with regard to a gun at an airport. So that was the purpose of my amendment. I think Rep. Spiller saw a bunch of us working together and was kind enough to put all the amendments together. So, but I just wanted that record to reflect that my particular interest had to deal with an active shooter situation at an airport in San Antonio. So I want to thank Rep. Spiller and Chair Kane for accepting the amendment.
The chair recognizes Mr. Spiller to close on the amendment.
I move adoption.
Mr. Spiller sends up an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author's objection to the adoption amendment. The chair has done. The amendment is adopted. The chair recognizes Mr. Kane. Any member will speak for, against, or on the bill. The chair recognizes Mr. Wu to speak in opposition to the bill.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, members, it's only been a few days since we've had another gun-related tragedy in our state. And before that, it was just a week before the previous tragedy. And then before that, we seem to be constantly at half-mast for our flags statewide. We constantly seem to be in a state of mourning. We constantly seem to be consoling grieving families, grieving parents, widows, orphan children. We do this on a near weekly basis, sometimes even a daily basis. We've said time and time again, said time and time and time and time again that we need stricter gun regulations, stricter enforcement of deadly weapons that people use to commit atrocities against other humans, against our fellow Texans, to slaughter children, to slaughter friends, to slaughter families. And yet, here we are again.
As required under Rule 5, Section 22, please confine your remarks to the question under debate. Please avoid personalities during debate.
And here we are again, passing another piece of legislation that does not restrict gun use, that does not restrict people who are irresponsible with their weapons, that does not restrict people who cannot follow the law and cannot follow common sense. We're passing another piece of legislation that will encourage gun violence, that will make it easier for people to get into altercations. This legislation deletes the requirements for posting signs. This legislation makes it easier for people to simply ignore all warnings, to ignore all signs, to ignore private property rights. Private property owners who have demanded that people not bring weapons into their establishments, their homes, their properties, whatever it is. They have a right to do that. And this body sits here and stands at this microphone and stands at the back mic and demands private property rights, demands that people respect and adhere to what individuals who own private property want. And yet, we're making it harder. We're making it harder for private property owners to say, I don't want you to bring your firearm onto my property. And this, we had passed legislation knowing that people, when they carried, knowing that there will be bad actors, knowing that people would be intentionally or recklessly abusive about how they carry their weapons. And we said, if there are signs up saying that you should not bring weapons into an establishment, onto another person's private property, if there are signs up, and they are the signs that follow the laws that we wrote down, then you have committed a crime. And now, the ability of us to prosecute bad actors, people who would intentionally or recklessly bring firearms onto private property against the owner's wishes, is now just, oops, sorry. How many other crimes do we have in this state where the defendant is allowed to say, oops, and that's the end of that? Why are we saying, of all the things, of all the crimes, of all the bad actions, of all the things that we disapprove of, why are we saying, oh, this is the one you get to pass on? The one thing that we have said in this body over and over again, saying we are tired of this. We are tired of people carrying guns and using them inappropriately. We are tired of people who say they are lawful gun owners who are irresponsible with their duties and responsibilities. Why do we keep giving people a pass on this? Why is it okay to say oops on this? But we have so many other pieces of legislation that would give people some relief, on their criminal actions. But to say you carried a deadly weapon into some place that people did not want you to take it. And if an owner says, I don't want people on my property carrying weapons, now they have with this bill, they don't know what they're supposed to do. They don't know if they have a right to post a sign. They don't know what the sign is supposed to look like. They don't know what the sign is supposed to say because we've now deleted it. The one thing that allowed private property owners to know how to protect their rights, to know how to demand their rights to their own property, is being taken away. And somehow, on this one thing, we're okay with it. This is unacceptable. You've watched me call point of order as a point of ordinance bill because I hate this bill. This is a terrible piece of legislation to pass, especially just days after another tragedy.
Mr. Speaker?
Ms. Flores, for what purpose?
Mr. Wu, would you take a question?
The gentleman yield for questions.
I will yield.
He yields for questions.
Doesn't it make more sense for people who are inadvertently carrying a gun and going into a place where the legislature has said guns are prohibited, wouldn't it make more sense to have a sign that makes it clear that you are not supposed to be bringing a gun into this place?
Absolutely, that's the whole point. When we have the O ground, the sub-O ground that we're deleting, provided not only say, hey, you can post a sign, but here is what the sign needs to say. And instead, we have nothing.
And so now, wouldn't it be that it would put the onus on the owner of that establishment or somebody in that establishment to tell somebody that they're not allowed to bring a weapon into?
And so basically we can't, the owners will have no ability to enforce this unless they see the person with a gun and unless they purposely go to them and say, you need to get out.
And couldn't that possibly cause a confrontation,
Absolutely.
especially in a bar?
And there's so many establishments where the owners of that property have said, we don't want guns in here for very specific reasons. Maybe because maybe because there's alcohol inside. Maybe because it's a place that people have get hot-headed about. Maybe it's because this is a place where sometimes people end up in arguments, and they've had this problem before. But instead of saying, here is how you put up a sign, here is what the sign needs to say, there's nothing. There's nothing now. So when my constituents call me and say, what are we supposed to do now? I'm going to say, I don't know, because the law doesn't say. I don't know how you warn people not to come into your property with a handgun, with an assault rifle, with a shotgun. It doesn't matter. And there's no way to tell. And time again, this body, the members here say, we want to promote responsible gun ownership. You know what's responsible? When you see a sign on the door that says, no firearms inside, a responsible owner would say, well, I'm not going to bring a gun inside. And now we have made it, now we're going to make it so that even responsible gun owners, people who are trying to follow the law, trying to do what's right, they won't know what they're supposed to do.
And Mr. Wu, doesn't the current law as it stands now before this bill, wouldn't it allow for defenses against, already has a defense that are rational, that are acceptable?
I'm sorry.
Well, that there's already a defense that
you.
if you walk into a place that doesn't allow them, and if you don't see the sign for whatever reason, you don't see it, you're allowed a defense, are you not?
No,
if you leave
no, it's
the
worse than that.
establishment?
This bill says even if you post up the sign, even if you put the sign up, it doesn't matter.
Right. With
Even
this
if
law.
you put the sign up here, it no longer matters. I think
agree
about that
with you,
situation.
Mr.
If an
Wu.
owner actually puts up the sign, even the sign that was lawful under O grounds, under the old law, under the law that is in place right now, even if they put up a sign following the exact requirements that we have set forward 2 years ago, it wouldn't do any good. It doesn't do anything.
I agree with you, Mr. Wu. I think
I urge
legislation
you to
is
vote
unnecessary.
against this bill.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Johnson, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for a
The
question?
gentleman's time has expired.
Gentleman,
The chair recognizes Mr. Tallarico in opposition to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I want to first thank the author of this bill for taking some common sense amendments that make the bill better, but this is still a bad bill. A year after Uvalde, days after Allen, we are here debating a bill that will loosen gun regulations. We're the only country in the world that allows this to happen. Globally, we are not an outlier in mental health. We're not an outlier in school security. We're an outlier in the number of readily accessible weapons of war in our community. You can't offer thoughts and prayers on Monday and then debate a bill to loosen gun regulations on Tuesday. I believe in the power of prayer. I believe prayer can change lives. I believe prayer can change the world. But there is something profoundly cynical about asking God to solve a problem that we're not willing to solve ourselves. God moves, God works through us. God has no other hands but our hands. We prayed, and God sent moms from all over the state, from both political parties, to advocate for gun safety. We prayed, and God sent families from Uvalde to travel 160 miles to advocate for gun safety. We prayed, and God sent our colleague from Uvalde to bring a bill that would prevent tragedies from happening in the future. But instead of hearing that bill, we're hearing this bill. We have ignored God's messengers. This is moral madness. And this is not the Texas House I know. Yesterday, members of this body from both political parties summoned the courage to address this problem. That's the Texas House I know, not this bill. I know many of you are worried about your conservative scorecards, but the only scorecard that matters is God's, and all of us are failing. I urge you to vote no on this bill.
Mr. Johnson, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a question?
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
yield.
He yields for a question.
Representative Talarico, have you heard on a number of occasions with bills like this that the authors are doing or passing bills like this to protect law-abiding, gun-loving citizens?
I have heard that.
Do you believe that the criminally insane and those that wish to break the law are also using these same laws to cause harm and destruction and death upon Texans and Americans?
I do. Representative Johnson, I don't think this is a cultural issue. I don't think this is a constitutional issue. I think this is a public safety issue. I believe in the Second Amendment. I have fond memories of shooting with my granddad in Harper, Texas, growing up. But when I read the Second Amendment, I don't see where it says an 18-year-old or a mentally ill person has the right to purchase a weapon of war, bring it to a school or to a hospital, to an airport, to a shopping mall, and threaten our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And do you think that those individuals who want to do harm and danger upon citizens, do you see this as a loophole for them to be able to scope out their next target, walk into that facility with a gun, and then maybe even see something that didn't sit well with them and then leave?
I do. And Representative Johnson, you'll remember that the original bill, the one that this is addressing, constitutional carry, was passed over the objections of educators, parents, and law enforcement.
Well, thank you for speaking out against this bill.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Members, I urge you to vote no on this bill.
The chair recognizes Mr. Kane to close on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage.
The question occurs on passing the engrossment to HB 2960. This is a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Kane voting aye. Show Mr. Rosenthal voting nay. Show Mr. Dutton voting nay. Mr. Kemple voting aye. Have all members voted? There being 85 ayes and 60 nays, HB 2960 is passed in engrossment. The chair recognizes Mr. Metcalf for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, there is dinner for purchase in the lounge.